The snow had returned early that year, falling like forgiveness. Outside the frosted window of a small-town bakery, two small faces pressed gently against the glass, watching as the world turned soft and white. Inside, a man stirred hot cocoa with one hand and steadied a worn, chipped mug with the other. Elias Harper never rushed the cocoa. He believed in the patience of warmth, and in mornings that began slow. The bakery smelled of cinnamon, roasted, coffee, and something sweeter, maybe memory. It was a modest space, tucked into a quiet corner of Windermere, Vermont, the kind of place people wandered into not just for bread, but for silence. The bell above the door jingled faintly as a customer entered, stamping snow from boots. Elias looked up, offered a soft smile, and returned to the task of aligning pastries in the case. There was rhythm in his work, predictability. It kept the ache manageable. Behind the counter, the twins sat cross-legged on a quilted bench. Lena was humming tunelessly, brushing powdered sugar off her brother's nose. Theo frowned, wiped at his cheek, then giggled anyway. They were mirror images in their own way. Dark curls, pale skin, eyes that held a depth neither of them understood, yet. 7 years old, already filled with questions Elias still hadn't figured out how to answer. He stole a glance at them. His chest ached, not with pain exactly, but with that strange heaviness that came from love steeped in longing. Every morning he woke before dawn, crept through the house, brewed his own coffee, and sat by the wood stove watching the fire catch. That quiet half-hour before the children stirred was when he let himself feel things fully. Regret, hope, fear, and above all, a wish he never spoke aloud. He'd raised them alone. Not because he wanted to, but because that's what happened when someone leaves before the real story begins. She hadn't even stayed long enough to see their faces. Left a letter, 4 pages, typed, unsigned, folded in perfect thirds and tucked into a linen envelope. The ink had barely dried. Elias found it on the kitchen table one morning, just beside a pot of untouched tea. She was gone by the time the sun broke through the mist. He never burned the letter. Never read it twice either. It sat behind the register now, framed in quiet. Wood, a kind of anchor no one else in town understood. People asked, sometimes. Not directly, but with glances, pauses. He never gave them much. Life happened, he'd say, and then it kept happening. The townspeople had grown used to the three of them, the solemn baker with the 2 children who giggled and whispered secrets and walked hand in hand to school. Elias became a constant in Windermere, a part of the background hum. The bakery stayed, open late some nights when storms turned harsh and neighbors needed shelter. He never turned anyone away. Warm bread, hot drink, a quiet chair by the fire. That was how he loved now. Not in declarations, in offerings. A low clatter brought him back. Lena had knocked over a cup, water pooling slowly across the wooden table. "I'm sorry," she whispered, eyes wide. Elias crossed the floor in 3 steps, kneeling beside her. "It's all right, little fox," he said softly, using the pet name he gave her the first time she wore red mittens. "Accidents are just reminders to slow down." She nodded solemnly, wrapping her arms around his neck. Theo leaned into the moment too, small arms circling his father's waist. Elias closed his eyes, held them both. In their warmth he felt everything he'd lost and everything he still had. Later that afternoon, when the last customer left and twilight crept into the corners of the shop, Elias lit the fireplace. The children curled up with storybooks while he swept the floor. The snow outside fell thicker now, piling gently along the window ledges. The world felt hushed, wrapped in wool. He stepped behind the register, opened the drawer, and pulled out the envelope. Maeve, that was her name. He hadn't spoken it in years, not out loud, not even in his thoughts sometimes. Names had power. Saying hers still hurt. But he hadn't let the memory vanish. He ran a thumb along the paper's edge. Time had yellowed it slightly. It looked like it belonged in another life. And maybe it did. He remembered her laughter, quick, bright, impatient. How she'd leave, coffee half drunk on every surface. The way she tapped her fingers when thinking, and how she always smelled faintly of ink and rain. She had been a storm in motion, always looking past where she stood, always reaching toward some undefined horizon. They hadn't been unhappy, not at first. She had dreams, though, big ones, full of skyline views and boardrooms, of making something. For herself, no one could take away. And when the pregnancy came, it slowed her world, not his. Elias had wanted the quiet life. She hadn't. She left with a plane ticket and that letter. He folded the envelope closed again, placed it gently back in the drawer. Behind him, Lena and Theo whispered something and then giggled, childhood bubbling up despite the hush of the day. He turned to look at them, saw Theo now asleep with his cheek pressed against the book's spine. Lena looked up at Elias with sleepy wonder. "Tell us a story," she said softly. "A real one." He smiled. "All right, but only if you promise to dream it after." Lena nodded, curling close to him as he sat between them. He wove a tale, something soft and slow, about a baker and two curious foxes who built a bakery out of pine cones and caramel. His voice was gentle, steady, the rhythm of a man who'd lived enough silence to appreciate the sound of innocence. The fire dimmed, snow still whispered against the windows. The town outside went dark, lights flicking off one by one, and far away, in a tall glass building filled with noise and steel, a woman stood by a floor-to-ceiling window, staring at the same sky. Maeve Carter, 35, CEO of a brand, now whispered on magazine covers and investor calls. Her office was sleek, her life a machine. But tonight, something in her hand trembled. A photo, creased, fading. A man with dark hair and tired eyes. Two children she had never met, Elias and the twins. She sat slowly, breath shallow, heart pulled. She had received an offer. A retreat center in Windermere needed reviewing. Her assistant thought it a low-priority field visit. To Maeve it was something else entirely. She traced the faces in the photograph, her thumb lingering on the smallest smile. Then she whispered to the empty room, "What if they still remember me?" Back in the bakery, Elias carried the twins to their small bedroom tucked behind the kitchen. He pulled blankets over them, kissed each forehead. Then, alone in the quiet, he stood by the window and watched the snow fall. He didn't know what waited beyond the season. He only knew the air smelled like change, and somewhere in the stillness, without knowing why, he felt a name stir on his tongue again. Not aloud, not yet, but it was there, and it wouldn't stay buried much longer. The train slid into Windermere with a long exhale of steam, as though reluctant to let her go. Maeve stood on the platform, wrapped in a dark wool coat that didn't quite stave off the cold. The snow here wasn't the kind that melted on arrival. It lingered, clung to boots, curled in the crooks of window panes like it had a right to stay. The kind of snow that knew your name and whispered it when no one else did. She hadn't stepped foot in this town in nearly 8 years. The station looked smaller, though perhaps it was she who had grown, stretched by cities and ceilings too high to see. A taxi waited, its headlights dim under the fog. Maeve moved toward it slowly, dragging a single suitcase behind her like it carried more than clothes. The driver didn't ask her name. In Windermere, things were known without needing to be said. They passed the bakery on the way to the inn. It was closed now, dark except for a faint flicker of orange behind the front curtains. Maeve didn't ask him to stop. She simply stared out the window as they passed, one hand brushing the inside of her coat where the photograph still rested in the lining. It had worn thin from travel, edges soft like memory. Inside the bakery, Elias stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up. The dishes had long since been done, but his hands remained submerged in the water, as though the warmth might reach somewhere deeper. The twins had gone to bed early, worn out from snowball fights and the syrupy pull of winter daylight. He heard the quiet hum of their breathing through the thin walls. The house was old, but it held them well. He had sensed something all day, like wind changing direction before a storm. Customers had moved slower, lingered longer. A robin had landed on the windowsill that morning, unusual for the season. Little things, small enough to ignore but too precise to dismiss. He didn't believe in omens, but he believed in the shape of silence. And today, it had felt like a breath held tight. Maeve checked into the inn with minimal words. The woman behind the counter didn't recognize her, or if she did, gave no sign. Windmere people were kind, but not forgetful. The key to her room was heavy brass. Room 3, upstairs, overlooking Main Street. She unpacked with mechanical precision, everything in thirds, everything folded like the pages of the letter she'd once left behind. On the small nightstand, she placed the photo. It stood like a confession. Maeve sat on the edge of the bed, fingers laced, heart pacing in slow, deliberate beats. She hadn't expected to feel this much. Time was supposed to dull things, but it hadn't dulled the sound of Elias's voice in her memory, or the way he used to say her name like it was a secret. He had always been still water, calm, reflective, deep enough to drown in. She, on the other hand, had been firelight and wind, restless, reaching. When she'd left, she told herself it was for them. That ambition was love, too. That creating something lasting would somehow circle back to them in the end. But the circles never closed. They just widened until everything felt out of reach. She had told herself not to see him. Just do the job. Meet the retreat investors. Sign the forms. Leave. But the photo was proof of her own lie, and the ache in her chest said she wasn't done with Windmere, or with him. The next morning broke in soft gray, clouds hanging low as if to muffle the day. Elias woke before the sun, as always. The fire took longer to catch this time. The logs, damp from the cellar, he coaxed it patiently, the way one coaxes anything worthwhile. By the time the children stirred, light had begun to soften the frost on the windows. He made their favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs with cheese, toast with apricot jam. Lena ate in silence, eyes still puffy from sleep. Theo drew shapes in, the condensation on his glass, a quiet hum rising from his lips. "I had a dream," Lena said, chewing, "that someone knocked on our door." Elias paused, his knife halting mid-slice through the bread. "Did you open it?" She nodded. She was tall, wore a black coat, but she didn't say anything, just looked at us. He forced a smile. Maybe it was a traveling storyteller, passing through. She shrugged, unconvinced, and went back to her eggs. Later that day, Maeve walked the snowy path along the edge of the town square. Her boots crunched softly, steady rhythm in the hush of the day. The bakery appeared around the bend like something drawn from memory, warm light in the window. That same wooden sign, faded now, but unmistakable. She didn't approach. Not yet. She stood across the street for nearly 10 minutes, watching. Elias appeared in the window once, placing a tray of scones onto the counter. His hair was slightly grayer. He still wore those sleeves rolled at the elbow. His shoulders were broader than she remembered, though that might have been the layers. She imagined his hands, gentle, flour-dusted, careful. Her breath fogged the air. She stepped back, turned, and walked toward the retreat center instead. Elias hadn't seen her, but when he stepped outside at midday to shake out the doormat, he paused. The scent in the air, jasmine and cold leather, was so familiar, he staggered. For a moment, he thought it was memory, but the footprints across the snow were fresh. That evening, after closing, he returned home in silence. The twins were all ready, in pajamas, curled up on the couch watching old cartoons. Elias didn't join them. He stepped into the hallway, opened the drawer behind the counter. The envelope was still there, untouched. Yet somehow, it felt more present. Maeve stood outside room 3, unable to sleep. The window looked out onto the street, and from here she could see the faint golden outline of the bakery's curtains. She wondered if he still read aloud to them, wondered what names he gave them when no one else was around. She wasn't sure what she had expected Windmere to do to her. She hadn't expected to feel so close to breaking. Not from guilt, but from wanting to belong to something she'd let go. She didn't deserve a welcome. but part of her longed for one anyway. Elias put the twins to bed again that night. This time. They asked no stories, just hugs, long ones. He stepped outside afterward, drawn to the porch by a weight in his chest he couldn't name. The snow had stopped. The sky was clearer than it had been in days. Stars blinked overhead, disinterested in the troubles of men. He sat on the porch swing, hands tucked into his coat, and for the first time in years he whispered her name into the air. Maeve. She turned suddenly in her bed at the inn, startled by a feeling she couldn't explain. Like her name had been said softly, far away, with care. She pressed her fingers to the photo once more. Tomorrow, she said to herself, voice barely a breath. Tomorrow, I'll see him. The morning unfurled gently, as though aware it carried something delicate. Windermere had dressed itself in a fresh coat of snow, the light from the sun turning each drift into a canvas of white fire. Maeve stood by the window in room 3, her breath warming the glass. She had not slept much. Sleep had become something she couldn't trust. Not when the past stood so close now. Not when the ache in her chest pulsed like a forgotten promise. She dressed slowly. Not for glamour, but with reverence. A dark green sweater, soft wool trousers, boots lined with sheepskin. She fastened a silver chain around her neck, a quiet relic from a different time. Then she picked up the photo. She held it, not like proof, but like a question. Downstairs, the inn was hushed. The woman at the counter nodded as Maeve passed, as if she understood what this day meant without knowing why. Outside, the cold bit gently at Maeve's cheeks. The bakery was only 5 minutes away by foot, but she walked as though through snowdrifts deeper than they were, as though each step remembered the years she'd been gone. At the bakery, Elias had just finished preparing the front counter. The scones were warm, the bread arranged in neat rows behind the glass. The bell above the door had rung all morning, but he barely heard it now, just a dull chime lost in his thoughts. The children had gone with his neighbor to the sledding hill. The quiet of the shop felt like a held breath. He moved to wipe the counter again when the door opened, and this time, the bell did not sound like all the others. He turned, cloth in hand. Then he froze. Maeve stood in the doorway. The moment stretched thin. Her coat was dusted with snow. Her hair was pulled back the way she used to wear it when she was tired. Her eyes, still the same shade of stormy slate, searched the room like it might disappear. She didn't speak, neither did he. She stepped forward. The photo trembled slightly in her hand. I don't know if I should be here. Elias didn't move. His jaw flexed once, twice. But you are. She looked down, then back at him. I came for the retreat project, but I think I needed to come for this too. He studied her face. Time had not been cruel to her, but it had not spared her either. There were new lines, etched not by age, but by choices, regret and resolve living side by side. He remembered that look. He'd seen it once in the mirror. I still keep the letter, he said softly. Maeve blinked. Her lips parted. I wasn't sure you ever read it. I read it, he said, but it didn't answer anything. She stepped closer. The photo came forward like an offering. I brought this with me, every city, every boardroom. It stayed in the lining of my coat. He took it from her hand. His fingers brushed hers. The photo was old, corners soft, the ink beginning to fade. A snapshot of them, Elias holding the twins, their infant faces round and peaceful, and Maeve, beside him, a smile she hadn't worn since. You never wrote, he said, not with anger but with the ache of long quiet. I thought I didn't deserve to, she replied. I chose ambition over family. I told myself it was temporary, but days became years. And by the time I realized I wanted to come back, I didn't know if you'd want me here. He placed the photo on the counter gently, like setting down a piece of glass. They asked about you. Not often, but they did. Maeve nodded, tears catching quietly in the corner of her eye. Do they remember me? Elias paused. They remember the lullabies and the smell of the lavender soap you used. Lena swears she sees you in dreams. Maeve brought a hand to her mouth. I wasn't brave enough to stay. You weren't ready, Elias said. Sometimes there's a difference. Silence followed. Not harsh, just full. She stepped closer, to the counter. Can I see them? I don't want to confuse them or force anything, but I want to try. Elias studied her. Years ago, he would have raised a wall so high no one could climb it. But years had worn him down in the right places. Smoothed out the sharp edges. They're at the hill with Margaret. They'll be back before lunch. Maeve nodded. I'll wait. He motioned to the table near the fireplace. There's tea. Sit. She moved to the chair, her hands still, trembling. The fire crackled, scent of cinnamon and pine lingering. Elias brought her a cup. Neither said much. Words, for once, were too large. The door opened an hour later. Children's voices poured in with laughter and the scent of winter air. Lena came in first, cheeks flushed, scarf lopsided. Theo followed, dragging a red sled and complaining of wet socks. Then they saw her. Both stopped mid-step. The door clicked, closed behind them. Maeve rose slowly. Her breath caught visibly, like a ghost leaving her lungs. Lena looked at Elias, then back at the woman. Daddy, she whispered. Is that? Maeve knelt just slightly. I don't expect you to remember me, but Theo stepped forward. I saw your picture in Dad's drawer. Maeve smiled, and the tears came now. Yes, I'm Maeve. Lena didn't speak. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Maeve's neck. No questions, no anger, just warmth. Theo watched for a second longer, then joined them. Elias looked on, his hands in his apron pockets, eyes moist. It was like watching a wound begin to scar over. Not healed, not whole, but on its way. Maeve pulled back just slightly, brushing Lena's hair behind her ear. I would like to come back again, if that's all right. Lena nodded, smiling. We make muffins on Sundays, Theo added. You have to help clean. Dad makes us. Elias chuckled, a low sound that hadn't passed his lips in years. House rules. Maeve looked up at him, something fragile blooming in her chest. I remember. They stayed like that, huddled near the fire, as though time could be rewritten one kind gesture at a time. The clock on the wall ticked softly, a rhythm steady as breath. Outside, the snow had begun again, fine like powdered sugar, covering the steps with quiet. Maeve didn't need forgiveness in words. She found it in the way Lena reached for her hand, in how Theo offered her the first muffin, in Elias, who brought her another cup of tea without needing to be asked. And when she left the bakery that evening, she did not take the photo with her. She left it on the mantel, by the fire, where it belonged. The snow that morning came like a blessing, light, unhurried, falling in spirals that made the air seem softer. In the quiet before the town stirred, Elias stood at the bakery window, watching as the flakes gathered like whispered confessions along the sill. The fire behind him warmed the small shop, the smell of rising bread already starting to fill the space. But his hands were still, resting on the countertop, fingers curled not from cold, but from thought. Maeve was due at noon. She had been coming every weekend for a month now. No declarations, no grand gestures, just small offerings, a new cookie. Recipe she tried with Lena, helping Theo organize the old photo boxes in the attic, folding linens while Elias counted coins at the counter. She never assumed. She simply showed up, carrying something invisible but weighty, the desire to stay, and the children. God, the children. The way Lena had taken to Maeve was like breath-catching flame. Theo, more cautious, asked harder questions, but always ended his visits sitting just a little closer. Elias had watched it all unfold, unsure whether to be grateful or afraid of how natural it was becoming. The bell above the door rang gently as Margaret stepped in, dusting snow off her coat. She held a basket in her hand. They were sharing. One sled, she said with a grin. She laughed like she used to, Elias. Not since they were babies have I heard that from her. He smiled faintly, brushing flour from his apron. She never did learn to steer. Margaret gave him a long, knowing look. Do you believe she's changed? He hesitated, not from doubt, but from the enormity of it all. I believe she's trying to. Margaret set the basket on the counter. Sometimes that's more than enough. Outside, the wind carried a different kind of cold, sharper now, less forgiving, the kind that reminded you winter had teeth. But Maeve arrived with cheeks pink and eyes shining. Her hands were tucked into leather gloves, and her scarf danced as she walked. She waved to the children through the frosted glass before pushing the door open. She smiled at Elias like someone remembering sunlight. I brought the cinnamon sticks this time, she said, holding up a small jar. Figured it was my turn. He nodded and reached for it. Their hands touched in that familiar, careful way. No rush, just recognition. The children tumbled down the stairs not long after, boots in hand, already recounting their sledding exploits. Lena wrapped her arms around Maeve's waist mid-sentence, and Theo pointed toward the back room where the photo albums waited. I found the one with your graduation cap, he said. You looked serious. Maeve laughed. I was terrified. Why? Theo asked, genuinely puzzled. She knelt to his level, brushing snow from his sleeves. Because I didn't know who I was going to become. And I thought becoming someone meant leaving everything behind. Theo frowned. But you didn't have to. I know that now, she whispered. Elias watched from the counter, the flour sifter in one hand. Something inside him shifted each time he saw her with them. Guilt mixed with grace. Regret threaded through with possibility. She had missed so much. And yet, she was here, folding herself back into the shape of their lives without breaking anything. That afternoon passed in slow layers, teacups refilled, cookies baked. Theo's chatter echoing down the hallway as he asked Elias questions about how ovens work. Maeve sat with Lena at the table, helping her glue pressed flowers into her scrapbook. They whispered to each other in that hushed way girls do when they feel safe. Later, while the children napped upstairs and the fire burned low, Maeve stood in the kitchen, her hands warm around a ceramic mug. Elias came in quietly, drying his hands. I keep waiting for it to fall apart, she said, not looking up. For one of you to tell me it's too late. He leaned against the doorway. Do you want us to? No, she breathed. I just wouldn't blame you if you did. He stepped forward carefully. You walked away, but you came back walking. She finally met his gaze. Do you think I can be their mother again? He took a breath. They already call you that. She blinked, tears rising too quickly. They don't say it aloud. They don't need to, he said. It's in how they wait for you at the window, how they save the last cookie, how Theo asks if you're warm enough before bed. Maeve turned slightly, wiping at her cheek. And you? I'm still deciding, he said quietly. But I no longer wake up wishing you'd stayed gone. She nodded slowly, pain and relief mixing like dusk and dawn. There was a pause. And then she reached into her coat pocket, pulling out something. Folded and worn. I wrote this before I came back. I didn't know if I'd ever give it to you. She placed the envelope on the table. It's not an apology, just a beginning. Elias looked at it. He didn't touch it. Not yet. But he nodded. Thank you, he said, and somehow it meant more than forgiveness. Upstairs, the floor creaked, the soft sound of little feet waking. Maeve smiled faintly and moved to go. Elias watched her go, then sat beside the letter. That evening, they had dinner together again. Not a celebration, not a milestone, just soup and bread and shared stories. Theo complained about homework. Lena showed a drawing she had made of their family. It had 4 figures now. After the dishes were cleared, Maeve helped Elias sweep while the children colored by the fire. Do you think we could build a little greenhouse out back? She asked suddenly. For spring? Elias raised an eyebrow. You garden now? Not well, she admitted, but I'd like to learn. He studied her, then nodded. We could start small. Lettuce, maybe tomatoes. She grinned. I'll be patient. He gave her a long look. Good. Later that night, when the children had gone to bed and the lights were dimmed, Maeve sat on the steps outside the bakery, watching the snow fall under the street lamp. Elias joined her, offering a blanket. They didn't speak at first, but then she turned to him and asked, "What happens next?" He thought for a moment. "We wake up. We make bread. You braid Lena's hair. Theo breaks something. We build a greenhouse. We see if this becomes something again." She leaned against his shoulder. "And if it doesn't?" He exhaled softly. "Then at least we didn't run this time." They sat there until the cold reached their toes, until the silence no longer needed words. And when they stood, it was together. Inside, the fire crackled low. The letter remained unopened on the counter, but it would be read, in time, like all the other things worth waiting for. And somewhere upstairs, Lena stirred in her sleep and smiled.